What's going on, everybody? So tonight it's going to be a little different. It's not going to be informational or really anything. It's going to be more of a story time video. So this video is going to be about why I chose to become an Army pilot. Now, the reason I'm making this video is because I think that some of you guys can connect with my story and resonate with it a little bit. I personally like hearing other people's story on why they chose a certain thing they chose to do. It makes you feel like maybe you have something in common with them, or you want to get into their thought process on what made them choose the decision that they chose. So I'm going to get into my story on why I chose to become a Army pilot. It's going to kind of be a longer one, just because there's a lot that went into me becoming an Army pilot, and I'll jump right into it. So, to understand my story on why I chose this life, you got to kind of go back to my childhood. My grandfather has always been an aviation buff, and ever since I was a little kid, my grandfather would take me to aviation museums. He had a love for aviation. He spent 20 years in the military, the Navy. He was on aircrew. He flew on the Super Connie a long time ago. They don't even fly the Super Connie anymore, really. But he was a radar man on one of the Super Connies. He had over 3,000 hours on it, and he also had his PPL, so he was a civilian pilot as well. And he was just an aviation buff. And he would take me to the Pensacola Naval Air Museum all of the time. And I just remember being a little kid and getting into those cockpit cutouts of like older aircraft, and I was always fascinated by them. Also, along with his love for aviation, I loved hearing his stories about his time in the Navy. So I was always fascinated by not only aviation, but the military as well. He would tell me times about him being in the Navy, and when most kids would probably zone out and really kind of tune their old grandpa out about these old military stories, I would always light up and listen. I was just naturally always interested in military stories, and ever since I can remember, I loved history. So, and they kind of tie in to one another. Along with my grandfather talking about his stories, about his times in the Navy, he would also talk about my family's lineage from being in the military. So I had my family was very involved in World War I and World War II. So I had a great-grandfather who was in World War II. He was actually a colonel. And then I also had a great-uncle who was in the Bataan March of Death. I'm sure most of you guys have heard of that incident in World War II when the Marine base was captured in the Pacific. And my great-uncle spent 4 years as a prisoner of war. I believe it was about 4 years, where he had really no contact with the outside, and he saw a lot of his friends die in that prison camp. And I was always fascinated by that story. I also had another great uncle. My great uncle Sonny was on Omaha Beach during D-Day in the first wave. So around that time, as a little kid, Saving Private Ryan had just come out, and I remember the scene of D-Day when the ramp drop and they hit the beach, and machine gun bullets are flying everywhere, and that movie captures D-Day very well. And I remember watching that movie for the first time, and then hearing about my great uncle Sonny, who had landed on that same beach. It just amazed me. So with all of these stories from my family that my grandfather would tell me about, I just felt this deep admiration since I was a little kid to serve in the military, and you know, I was just, I loved that my family members had done that, and I felt just kind of like a need to contribute something that was even close to being like that. So, and then later on, as I got into high school, sports was really my strong suit in high school. To be honest with you, the only reason I went to class was because I needed to make passing grades in order to play sports. My favorite sport growing up was football. I loved football, and I always played football. I started on the varsity team from a freshman all the way to a senior, and like I said, I was really good at it, but I just being realistic with myself as I got into my senior year, that I knew I had a lot of fun playing it in high school, but I did not think that I had a long-term career beyond high school really in football. I always believe in chasing your dreams and your desires, but at the same time, you also got to be realistic with yourself. And I knew that that wasn't just a long-term career path for me. My grades were average at best, so I certainly wasn't getting a scholarship for that, but I really didn't apply myself in high school beyond just trying to make grades to play sports and pass. So my senior year in high school, I was kind of like in a dilemma of like, okay, well, what now? You know, which I'm sure a lot of kids are. So caught up in this dilemma, me and my best friend had gotten together. He had a lot of information and he had done a lot of research on ROTC. Like I mentioned, growing up and in my childhood, I was always interested in the military. And he had talked to me about how ROTC works and how you can become a commissioned officer after college, and all of it made sense to me. And like I said, I had always felt the desire to go into the military. I went a while without really thinking about it, but as I was nearing my senior year, I really started to consider it, especially after I found out about ROTC and the benefits it gives you for college, and then you have a guaranteed job after college. So it all sounded really good to me, and everything my best friend was telling me all made sense, and he was going to do the same exact thing. The route that we went was called the SMP route. So you basically join your state's National Guard. You get shipped off to basic training. You do basic training, and you come back and you serve in your state's National Guard. While you're doing this, because the National Guard is part-time, you only drill once a month and 2 weeks out of the year, you can go to college. And that's exactly what we did. So you get all the tuition assistance, you get the GI Bill, and then once you sign a cadetship with your university, you get what's called the kicker. Whenever I went to college, it came out to around $1,500 a month, which, you know, college students are broke. That's a decent amount of money. Not only does it give you the $1,500 a month, it pays for your school as well. So free college, and you get a paycheck. Sign me up, you know what I mean? So and you get a guaranteed job after college. So yeah, I was like, sign me up. That sounds like a good deal. So in 2011, we shipped off to basic training. I enlisted in the National Guard as an infantryman, and went to Fort Benning, did OSIT, and then came back, and I started going to college. In 2012, I signed my cadetship with the University of Southern Miss, and I was officially a cadet. So in college, I actually applied myself and I made pretty good grades. For those of you who are old enough to remember this, during the Obama administration, it was the biggest drawdown in our country with the military since after World War II. So it was actually really hard to commission active duty and in ROTC. You had to have well over a 3.0 GPA in order to lock down an active duty commission. So that pressure caused me to study really hard because I really wanted active duty because it's a guaranteed full-time job. So like I said, I did really well, and your junior year you get to rank your branches. Whenever I was going through ROTC, there were 16 branches in the Army at the time. I know they may have added a few of those, but whenever I was going through, it was 16. You rank what you want, obviously, first, all the way down to what you want least as last, the 16th branch. So while I was in college, I am embarrassed to admit this, but I actually took the CIF test and I failed it. Yeah, super embarrassing, right? So my junior year, I took the CIF test, and I did not study for it at all. I told myself I was going to, and I procrastinated and just never did. And the day I took my CIF test, I went in, I took the CIF test at my ROTC battalion. The cadre member that was there to proctor me the exam left the room and went out into the hallway and was having the longest conversation and loudest conversation I had ever heard on a phone. And I'm undiagnosed ADHD. I have a hard time focusing as it is, so trying to take a pretty challenging test with no studying is hard enough as it is. It's even harder when you have somebody having an extremely loud conversation for about an hour and a half out in the hallway. So I take full responsibility for not studying for that test, but I'm not going to lie, I was pretty distracted when all of that was going on. So yeah, it's just a combination of bad luck and just being an idiot and not studying for it, I guess. So whenever I ranked my branches from 1 to 16, I couldn't even put aviation as number 1 because I was ineligible for it. I had heard that med service was good, although I had a love for the infantry. I had been in it in the National Guard for a while, and I didn't think that I would enjoy that. I would enjoy a 20-year long career in the infantry. Like I said, deep down in my heart, I'll always be infantry. I love those guys. But yeah, I don't think it was for me for 20 years. So, med service was my number 1, and I got it. I got med service active duty. And I didn't even know that you could be a pilot in med service until much later on down the road. But moving on to my first assignment, so I commissioned in 2016 and went on to Bullock and then went out to my first assignment at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Unfortunately, it is not a very cool duty station. There I was a battalion medical officer for a field artillery battalion. And honestly, I was a pretty good meadow. I felt that it was an easy job, not very hard to be good at, pretty important, but just not very hard to be good at. I mean, as long as you apply yourself and work hard, you could very easily make a long career and do well in the meadow life, really. But I just felt unfulfilled as a battalion meadow. So while I was a battalion meadow, I felt that I was constantly chasing relevancy, if you will. I was one of those guys in very good shape. I always did really well in the military as far as schools go and just, tactics and everything. While I was a meadow, I went to Ranger School. I went to Air Assault School. And like I said, I was just constantly chasing relevancy. And I don't know if I realized it at the time, but looking back on it, I just felt unfulfilled. And I felt like I overcompensated by constantly wanting to do all these challenges in these schools and everything. And um, I realize this now, but I think this really ties into one of the main reasons I chose to become a 67J. So we'll get back to that part, but the next part of the story that's important is meeting my future wife. So whenever I was at my first duty station, I went on leave to see family members. As I was coming back, I was catching an airplane from New Orleans to Dallas. And I got on the airplane, had a nice exit row, and I remember looking down the aisle, and I saw this beautiful young lady walking down the aisle, and I was just like, oh, she's really cute, but I highly doubt she'll sit next to me, because normally it's normally a big giant man, and you're wrestling for the armrest the whole entire time. Never is it a very cute girl that you can have a long conversation with your entire flight. Lucky for me, I thought she was going to zip right past and walk right past me, but she actually turned, put her bag up, and sat down in the chair next to me. So at the time, I felt like such a nerd because I actually had a Game Boy out, and I was playing Pokemon on a Game Boy. And she turns and looks at me and she said, "Hey, what you playing there, Pokemon?" And I was like, "No, of course not," and I like put it down in my bag. Like, I didn't want to talk about that anymore. So, yeah, of course not. And she's like, "Oh, well, I'm Chelsea. What's your name?" So I introduced myself. I'm like, "Hey, I'm Devin." And we just start talking from there on out. I mean, we had this whole entire flight, like an hour and a half. I can't remember how long the flight is, hour and a half, hour. But we talked the entire time. It felt like the plane trip was only 5 minutes. Had some really great conversations. So as the plane pulls up to the jet bridge and we start to disembark the plane, I had this thought in my head that, wow, I really need to get this girl's number, because my grandfather actually met my grandmother when she was a flight attendant. And I took this as a sign of fate. Like, dude, you got to get this girl's number. She's a flight attendant. Your grandmother was a flight attendant. Your grandpa met her when she was a flight attendant. This is your sign. You got to get her number. So we get out of the plane, we're walking down the jet bridge, and just before she turns, I'm like, "Hey, do you mind if I get your number?" It was kind of awkward because I had waited for the last minute. I was contemplating this, how am I going to do this and still look cool? So she's like, "Oh yeah, of course. Take my number down." So I took her number down, and because she was a flight attendant, she had benefits. She could fly anywhere she wanted to, really for free, when she wasn't working. So we started texting, we talked on the phone a lot, and we eventually met up in Oklahoma City and got something to eat. And we started dating from there, and became girlfriend and boyfriend. And during our time together, we went literally everywhere. Because I was her boyfriend at the time, she could put me on her flight benefits, because flight attendants are allowed to give a certain amount of people that they're either family members with or close friends with. They're able to put them on their list of people who can fly what's called standby. Basically, if there's a vacant open seat on an airplane, you can get that seat for free if you have these benefits. So whenever I was working, I'd get off Friday afternoon, and wherever my girlfriend was, I'd get on a plane and go meet her. And, hotels paid for, planes paid for. We were living the dream. And then when she wasn't working, we would take trips together. We went everywhere you could imagine. We went to Hawaii, we went to Boston, we went to DC, we went home. We're both generally from the same area, so we'd fly into New Orleans all the time. We went everywhere, and we had a great time doing it. But this is where this, if you're wondering where is he going to tie this into being a pilot, I'm getting to it, I promise. So as I'm flying on all these airplanes, going around the world, living the dream, I'm looking at these pilots and I'm like, man, these guys got it made. They just get on this airplane in their nice little suits and cool looking outfits, back it out, take off, fly all over the place, stay in nice hotels. Like, these guys got it made. And I started thinking, at that time, I knew that you could become a 67J. And I'm like, if I want to do that, like I said previously, I always thought aviation was cool ever since I was a kid. And I always kind of had a desire to fly. And at this point, I'd never flown at all, but I just thought that aviation was really cool. And it's like, man, these guys got it made. Just kind of daydreaming. Like, I want to do this. And if I want to do this, there's no better place to start your aviation career than in the military. One, it's all free. You immediately get a job paid doing it. And it looks really good on your resume when you get out and you want an airline job. So on top of kind of that epiphany as I'm flying on these airplanes and going all over the country, as I'd go into work, I would kind of think about it. I was like, man, I don't belong doing this meadow job behind a desk making PowerPoints all day. I'm essentially a secretary. What I really am meant to do is be behind the controls of a Black Hawk going into hot LZs and rescuing people that have been having a bad day and then coming back. That's really what I feel like I'm supposed to do. And that kind of goes back to me feeling unfulfilled in my current job and wanting more. It started to all add up and make sense. It was like a light bulb had went off in my head. So I started talking to my girlfriend at the time about it, and I was like, hey, I'm really thinking about being a pilot. And I talked to her about, there's this thing called 67J, and you can do that and become a medevac pilot. And she's like, do it. That sounds awesome. So I ordered a SIF study guide off of Amazon. You've probably seen it in previous videos that I've posted. And I started studying for the SIF test. And me and my girlfriend would go to Starbucks just about every single evening. I'd take the practice test, she'd grade my practice test, and then we'd go over the things that I got wrong until that I could take the test and get pretty much everything right. I scheduled my SIF test, and long story short, I went in there and aced it, passed the SIF test, and honestly, I felt like putting together the rest of my packet was going to be really easy. I've always been in very good shape, very healthy, and I knew my packet was going to look good with my officer evaluation reports. I knew I was going to be okay on letters of recommendation, and all I had to do was write a letter of intent, get that flight physical, and I had already passed my SIF test. This was a done deal. So that takes me into the next part of what I want to talk about. So as I was getting my packet put together and I was talking to Branch, basically the guy that manages the packets for going to the 67J board, I was talking to him about my packet one day, and he was like, I don't know if you know this or not, but the 67J consultant to the Surgeon General is actually the commander of the hospital at Fort Sill, which is where I was stationed. And I was like, wow, I didn't even really know what the 67J consultant was at the time, but it sounded pretty important, and it sounded like I needed to have a meeting with this guy. So I was like, wow, really? And he was like, yeah, man. He's like, you should try to get a mentor session with him or something, and, it would look really good for you, as long as the meeting goes good, like, you should try to do it. And I was like, okay, cool. So I got in touch with his people. Guy's name at the time was Colonel Ortiz. And I got in touch with his people, and he was kind enough to set up a meeting with me. I put together my packet, and I prepared myself, and I wrote down a bunch of questions that I could sit down and ask him. And here's some advice to you guys listening right now that are working on your packets. If you ever get the chance to talk to a senior officer, warrant officer, whatever, they're nice enough to take the time to sit down and talk to you, make sure you always prepare questions, good questions, because for two reasons. One, you never want to sit down with somebody who's taken the time out of their day that's that senior, and you just kind of stare at them, and you're like, and you don't look like you don't have anything to talk about. But two, when you sit down with that person and you start asking them well thought out questions, they're going to be like, wow, he prepared. And two, these questions are going to turn into good conversation. So it's going to be a very engaging conversation with that senior ranking person that you're having a sit down with. So definitely do that. But getting back on topic, so I met Colonel Ortiz. Still to this day, out of all my time in the Army, he is the nicest, most down-to-earth officers I'd ever met in the Army. He took the time out of his busy day, full bird colonel, commander of a hospital, consultant to the Surgeon General for 67Js, to sit down there and have a conversation with me. And like I said, he was very low threat, chill, cool guy. And he is a very well-known 67J and was an outstanding pilot. So, had a great meeting with him. At the end of the meeting, I said, hey, sir, would you be willing to write a letter of recommendation for me? He said, Devin, I'd love to write a letter of recommendation for you, but being the 67J consultant, and I'm pretty much, the head shed on the board, he didn't use those words, but it would be unfair to the other candidates applying for me to write you a letter of recommendation. However, I can reach out to a good friend of mine who was a previous 67J consultant, and he's a brigadier general. We'll set up a meeting with you and him, and he'll write you a letter of recommendation. I was like, okay, well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And that's exactly what happened. And long story short, after that meeting, we get to the board. So my packet is submitted. HRC was very slow in releasing the MILPER message. So they were supposed to release it on some date, I think, in at the end of March, beginning of April. But I remember it going over by a week. And I was on the phone with HRC all the time, like, hey, are you guys going to come off that MILPER? When are you guys going to release it? I'm ready to see the results. And they were going back and forth. They were like, yeah, we're going to release it. And on the day they said they were going to release it, I was like, look, if they don't release this MILPER message by 1 o'clock today, I'm going to call HRC. And they did it. 1300 rolled around. So I called HRC. A very nice female lieutenant colonel answered the phone, and I had talked to her previously, and I was like, hey, it's Lieutenant Rushing. I was wondering if that MILPER message was going to come out. And she said, it's going to come out, and it's going to release today. And I could get in trouble for telling you this, but you got selected. You're going to be on that MILPER message. You're going to be a medevac pilot. And I was just like, yes, I got selected. I remember that being one of the best phone calls ever. And I said, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. Click. Went in. I was strutting like Conor McGregor into this meeting that I had to go into. It was a command and staff meeting. And, I was kind of strutting there with a grin on my face. And my battalion commander's like, hey, what's going on? And I'm like, I got selected, man. I'm going to be a medevac pilot. And he's like, congratulations. Like, he was super happy for me. So yeah, that pretty much concludes my story. Now, I get it. It's probably a really long-winded story. I hope you guys found it interesting. I hope you guys could connect to that story. And if some of you guys are on the fence and you're like me and you're like, man, I really want to fly. I really want to do this. I really want to do that. I am a big proponent of, like, if you're feeling that way about something, you should probably do it. Like, if you start doing your research on aviation, like not just military aviation, general aviation, like people who become airline pilots, like there's stories about lawyers, guys on Wall Street just feeling unfulfilled in their job, feeling like there's something missing, kind of like how I described in parts of my story. And yeah, they leave their job and they go and become pilots. And like I said, I am definitely happy that I made the decision to become a pilot, and I hope you guys make the decision to become a pilot, join the community. It's a great life at times, at least in the military. It could be a drag at times, but I think the good definitely outweigh the bad. But anyways, I got to finish with this. If you guys are still watching my videos and you're unsubscribed, please subscribe. I saw in my analytics that 71% of people that watch my videos are unsubscribed. So it's free, guys, and if you find my content interesting, there's no reason not to subscribe. It's risk-free. So please do that for me, and give the video a like, and leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts on joining aviation, and let me know your story. If you're in aviation right now, I want to know how you wound up there. So please share. I love engaging with you guys in the comment section. So thanks for watching, and I'll be back with you guys soon.